In my previous devlogs I've built the foundation of my game. The smooth, low-poly terrain, the blocks to build stuff with, and the props to give it all that final touch. And now that all these ingredients are prepared, it's finally time to fuse all these together in the world generation. I'm talking full-blown terrain generation, decoration of that terrain with plants and other large structures, like big plants of course, all bundled within a beautiful modular system that's easy to configure and fast. Before we dive into that though, I wanna quickly show you some smaller details that I've worked on since the last episode. Firstly, I wanted to speed up the chunk loading, so I optimized the terrain mesh generation with mixed results. I swear, the weirdest bugs always arise when optimizing. Eventually I got it working right though, and I actually managed to boost the chunk loading quite a bit. I could look at this all day. Somewhere in between I also updated Unreal Engine to version 5.7.3, which actually was a nightmare. Errors everywhere, I couldn't move anymore, and updating the Lyra sample project that I use was the worst. But I will probably go into deeper detail on that in a follow-up video. Oh, also because of the update, the lighting all of a sudden changed, which I used as an opportunity to get and integrate this gorgeous dynamic sky and weather system by So Stylized. But now back to this video's topic, world generation. You can think of world generation as kind of a very weird form of art, all about mashing various different mathematical functions and concepts together to make your computer spit out mountains, trees and lakes, or really anything else. And as you might remember, I technically already had a world generation system in the past. These barren, empty landscapes also had to come from somewhere after all. However, that system I really hacked together within the terrain system, just so I could have some sort of landmass to look at and test with. This new proper system ended up a lot more complex though. Firstly, I split up the whole process into these completely separate stages. And now, to illustrate that process, let's take a look at the birth of a single chunk. To get started, it would ask the generation manager for a certain state. We'll go with the so-called terrain materials state in this example. The generation manager then figures out which of the other stages are required for the requested one and processes one after the other, returning the final result back to the chunk, which then creates the terrain mesh, yada yada, we got our world. You know the drill. In practice, the first stage is always the height map stage. It may look a bit boring, but essentially it's the groundwork for everything else. It calculates a grid of values which represent the height of the terrain at each voxel. For this first game version I am strategically borrowing this pre-made height map by Motion Forge Pictures. I'm not lazy, I'm efficient. Jokes aside, this is a really good option here, since I don't require an infinite explorable world yet, and it actually looks a lot better than the half-assed procedural height map I would have probably otherwise made. Don't get me wrong, I love procedural generation and I have so many ideas for really cool height map generation, but I really need to cut myself off somewhere, otherwise the scope of this will grow endlessly. Moving on to the next stage. The terrain landscape describes the rough terrain data without any details additional to the height map, just pure rock. The following terrain materials stage is where it gets more interesting, not only because it finally brings in some color. In this stage I use the height map data to calculate the steepness, for which the simplest way is to take some neighboring height map values and just compare them to the center one, which is exactly what I did. Depending on that resulting steepness value, I determine whether the terrain should be grass or rock on the surface. In this example, that would already be it, but I can't leave it like that. This still looks really barren. I want to add some plants. Specifically, I decided to add trees, some flowers and other smaller plants. For those smaller plants I will use these 3D models that I got a while back already, but I decided against 3D models for the trees since I want them to be more integrated into the world. I want it to be possible to chip away at the trunk just like you break through the rock bit by bit, which is exactly why I'll make these part of the terrain. To conclude, I now need a world generation system that can place objects that might either be basic models or somehow made of terrain voxels. How hard could that be? For the 3D models I'm using the same placement scheme system that I already used to directly place props in the world. It takes in the rough target position and the surrounding terrain data to determine the perfect position to place it just on the surface of the terrain. However, the issue with that is that it usually takes that surrounding terrain data directly from the terrain manager. But to the terrain manager, the terrain doesn't exist yet, since we're still in the midst of the world generation. So we can't do that here. To circumvent this, I added an option to directly pass in the required terrain data from the generation manager. So that wasn't too bad to solve, I guess. But now the trees. Oh, the trees. These got a lot more complicated. Well, the placement bit at least wasn't too bad. Once I did figure out where to place them though, I couldn't just throw the tree voxels at that location, since that results in trees cut in half and trunks with barely any leaves or no leaves at all. The reason for that is simply that the trees are way bigger than the props and regularly stretch across multiple chunks, so I had to come up with something here. The per chunk thinking like with the props wouldn't work. In the end, I created an extra sort of in-between step for multi-chunk structures that firstly only defines the tree's bounding box and position, allowing all the surrounding chunks to access that data and place the bits that protrude into them. In the process of making that, I of course somehow messed up the trees themselves completely, but once I got that sorted out and finally decided to ditch that horrible leaves material, I got myself some beautiful trees that are perfectly integrated into the terrain. Add back the new lighting and the performance improvements, and with this I am already really happy. I think I'll probably continue to tweak the props and the tree shapes a little bit, but overall this will be it for the world generation of the first version at least. As always, I hope this video was helpful, inspiring or just entertaining to you, and I'll see you in the next one.